The BRICS. No, the BRICS have confused everyone because they've tried to rhetorically describe an anti-imperialist project that includes challenging the strength of the US dollar and the malgovernance of international institutions like the World Bank and IMF on the one hand. But on the other hand, they've been very much part and parcel of strengthening the IMF, giving $75 billion in new capital in 2012. Or in the case of climate, more or less agreeing to Washington's perspective. This was done by the BRICS without Russia at the Copenhagen summit, and it was a destruction of the Kyoto Protocol, something that Russia agreed to. And that meant no binding agreement on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And it's in this sense that the BRICS are not against imperialism, but part of, you could even say, a sub-imperial bloc. On the other hand, they are not working coherently. For example, in 2012, they had the chance to influence the new World Bank presidency. And the president is normally from the United States. They had a chance to put up a united candidate. But between the 5 BRICS countries, they actually supported 3 different candidates. And Russia supported the US candidate. So it's a very mixed bag. And we'll see whether a new BRICS bank emerges that is any different. And we would have thought if there was going to be a difference, then BRICS could have supported the Bank of the South that the Venezuelan late President Chavez had proposed as a genuine alternative to the logic of the Bretton-Wood institutions. But they rejected that idea, and they're possibly going to announce a new BRICS bank in Moscow. No, our view of the world financial system is that it's still being run by the core elites of Western banks, backed by the Bretton Woods institutions and the major governments, especially in the United States and Europe and Japan. And their technique for dealing with their problems is pretty rudimentary. They throw money at them. And the technical term is quantitative easing. And not only has the United States done this very substantially 3 times, but also Britain and the EU have announced their willingness to throw money at the problem. They did it in 2008. And then they transferred this huge private debt to the public sector. And in all 3 cases of the major blocks of the EU monetary system, the British pound, and especially the US, they are now imposing austerity. And that means that they're actually, unlike someone as capable of understanding this as John Maynard Keynes, they're actually making this problem worse. And Keynes had suggested during these periods of stagnation by the private sector, government should spend more. And the fact that we've got such a long-term stagnation, a sort of slow-motion depression, Japanese system of long periods of no growth, suggests that the bankers are still very much influential in all of the macroeconomic policies. So we're very convinced, and sitting in South Africa, which is very much a victim of this process, where huge amounts of capital are flowing out of South Africa into the international tax havens and into the City of London especially, we see that the inability to regulate has terrible contagion. And South Africa's currency has crashed about 6 times in the last 20 years. And we've gone through lots of big tumultuous moments with crashes of commodity prices and of the stock market because of the volatility internationally. And it really does lead us to think the solution has to be start off with exchange controls so that money will stay inside the country and not go into this terribly vulnerable world financial system. Yeah, the privatization wave occurred from the mid-1990s, and South Africa, even under Nelson Mandela, was subject to all of the pressures of international finance and domestic big business, along with a new black emerging bourgeoisie. And these, in unity, suggested privatization would help solve some of the socioeconomic problems and take a fiscal burden off of the government so that the government could spend more on poor people. That's the rhetoric. The reality was that as many services were commercialized, low-income people couldn't afford to pay for them. And those services then began to fall apart, and people had to actually steal water and steal electricity in the cases where commercialization of state services, with some private managers, for example, Johannesburg, managed by the big French company Suez for 5 years. And these were disasters without an exception, including toll roads, including the airlines, partial privatization, which had to be reversed, including some of the media and even recreational facilities. In case after case of state services being privatized, the result's been a disaster. And this is not even controversial to say in South Africa. And the pressure continues because the state is under the fiscal austerity regime, not as bad as in other places, but it means, for example, that new roads are being tolled. And that's created a wide range of resistance, the trade unionists and even white middle-class motorists sitting in and trying to prevent this process from going any further. So keep an eye on this space. As capitalism commodifies everything under the sun, there's inevitable resistance. In South Africa, with the most inequality and amongst the highest protests per person in the world, this is one of the most exciting sites where we have rolled back some of the privatization, the main victory being getting AIDS medicines that were $15,000 per person per year from big private branded pharmaceutical companies. These are now provided free in the public clinics, made generically, and this is simply because of social protest.